Daniel 5, verse 1, Belshazzar the king made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in the presence of the 1,000. While he tasted the wine, Belshazzar gave the command to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple which had been in Jerusalem, that the king and his lords, his wives, and concubines might drink from them. Then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken from the temple of the house of God, which had been in Jerusalem, and the king and his lord's wives, concubines, drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Lord, just open your word to us, God. This is, Lord, just so pertinent to many of us who lived this way, God. There's so many right now, God, they're so lost, they're so blind, God. Even tonight, they're toasting false gods and totally oblivious, Lord, that the world is spiraling out of control. And God, as we gather together to pray tonight, Lord, may you hear our prayers as we prepare our hearts in your word. God, may our prayers be effectual and fervent and avail much. Bless your word to our hearts, God, we ask in Jesus' name, amen. So here we have the backstory of what went on the night that the great Babylonian Empire fell to the Medo-Persian Empire. We were given historical information in Ezra chapter 1. Here is the inside scoop. This is what was going on inside the palace, the city of Babylon, which was considered impregnable due to the size of the walls, due to the river that was running through the city, built right on the Euphrates River. They could laugh at people who would try to put a siege around the city. They could stay in there forever, and that was the way they did battle in those days. And Brian and I, our sons are in Austria right now. They've been going to castles, and it's amazing when you go to a castle. I just always thought it was somebody's house. And then you go and you realize, no, this is where everybody ran when the bad guys were all coming flooding in. And you see how they had it all set up with, how they would shoot at them and dump oil on them and everything else. And you see the actual weapons, and you realize, these people had to fight for their lives. Here, the Babylonian Empire coming down to the city of Babylon was, they could be partying away. They were besieged and thinking nothing's going to happen to them the very night that they get conquered. But you think of, what a gift we have here in the Bible. Not that I have to tell you that, but, I love being reminded. I mentioned that because, as I pointed out, when we began our study here of this book, the book of Daniel, it's been probably the most maligned book with regards to its historical accuracy of any book in the Bible, just due to the fact that it contains incredible specific prophecies that have come true, as we'll see, especially as we get towards the end of the book. But historical narratives like this, you're not going to find this anywhere else in history. They have somehow, those who don't want to believe the Bible have somehow tried to explain away all of this. They have to if they're going to justify living, a sinful life, which God, he will allow someone to go only so far in their foolish rebellion like this king we see here. God will allow him to go only so far before he yanks them back into reality. It's like when I was growing up, we had this dog, and it kept killing all of our chickens and, running into the road. And so for his own good and ours, we had to chain him up. And it took a couple days for him, to kind of get the hang of this rope thing. He kept running, and then he just, he could chair back. And I hope there's no PETA people here, but that's how we did things in those days. He'd run, he'd get pulled back, and you think he'd learn after a time or two. It took him days, this dog needed to repeat his idiocy over and over. That's how it's been, as you study the veracity, the authenticity of our Bible. That's how it's been with these supposed scholars all the way down through the ages, they thought that they're smarter than God. And they run with some theory that denies the accuracy of the Bible until some person stumbles upon an ancient manuscript in a monastery. Or some shepherd boy just tosses a rock into a Qumran cave and finds the Dead Sea Scrolls. Oh, look at that. Some unknown archaeologist excavates an abandoned city only to find biblical evidence. Wow, this is the place that the Bible's been talking about for hundreds of centuries that scholars have been denying even existed. That's the case with Belshazzar, the king, here in verse 1. There'd been no trace of such a person for the 1,400 years of history that they had found for the Babylonian Empire. There's no trace of this guy. Who is this king? There's no writing of him. So liberal scholars, they scoffed at his existence. Oh, the Bible's wrong. There's no king. There's no King Belshazzar. No one recorded like that. Until 1853, when that theory, reached its end, and those who denied the Bible, get jerked back into reality again. An inscription was found carved into the cornerstone of ancient pagan temple in Ur of the Chaldees. It's modern-day Iraq. It read, "May I, Nabonidus, not sin against thee, and may reverence for thee dwell in the heart of Belshazzar, my firstborn favorite son." And then from subsequent discoveries, they found in inscriptions in 1861, 1882, 1924, all the way up to 1961, it was learned that Nabonidus, the son of Nebuchadnezzar, spent much of his life in retirement outside of the city, and that his son Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, was ruling over the army and the administration of the Babylonian Empire as co-regent with his father, and that he was conquered and killed in one night. As they've compiled these ancient records, the official historical record of Babylon, that they did have, it had been embellished, is what they think, because this guy was such an embarrassment to them. And so they found up other historical evidence from different sources, but in the official records, there's no information about this guy at all because of who he was and how he acted. But the Bible declares it openly and honestly, what went on here in Daniel chapter 5, and it's the treasure we have. Not simply the accuracy of the events. That's one thing. There's no doubt of that. The Bible's true. Just the accuracy is, just incredible. But it's not the historical facts, the dates and names, but through the authorship of the Holy Spirit, we have this whole drama preserved. From that fatal night, man, the actors, the dialogue, a detailed account of emotions and interactions, all for us to learn from, all that I can read that and I can gain insight into spiritual lessons that God has preserved that others want to bury and not even look at. Some of the cuneiform records that have been found confirm the character or the lack of character of Belshazzar here. While the city was under siege by Cyrus the Persian, Belshazzar throws a wild party, man, for 1,000 of his lords, verse 1 says, all his drinking buddies. When it says there in verse 1, it pleased him, Belshazzar, king, made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in the presence of the 1,000. The idea here is he would be elevated on a platform like a stage, and he would be leading the debauchery of the evening. And while he tasted, or after tasting wine, literally, verse 2, when he was drunk, in other words, like, hey, I got an idea. Let's go get those fancy cups, my grandfather Nebuchadnezzar brought back when he conquered the Jews. And again, the word for father in verse 2, it's an Aramaic word that is a generic word for ancestor. The context determines the specific ancestor being spoken of. And again, the archaeology has confirmed Belshazzar as Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. And so, verse 3, then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken from the temple of the house of God, which had been in Jerusalem, and the king, his lords, his wives, concubines, drank from them, drank wine, praised gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So nothing is too sacred to be profaned when people come under the influence of alcohol. I don't know if you've ever been around these type of people. You know, this was myself to my shame. But people don't hesitate to desecrate even the holiest things, even taking delight in that, which is the picture here. People acting complete foolishness just for the sake of foolishness. I read a few weeks ago some people were busted boiling chickens in the Yellowstone hot springs. They can't, they got off with a fine. This is super dangerous, totally illegal. They had a camp. They had a camp stove, but someone got the bright idea, hey, I know, let's cook our food in hydrothermal springs that are like over 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And park rangers found them there, these chickens in burlap sacks. And they told the park rangers, we're trying to be, extra careful. And, the way we read the signs was that, just don't do anything destructive. That's the way we read it, keep out, And people died from falling into these things. And it's thought the same motivating factor, alcohol, was involved in their brilliant idea. So they're going out of their way here, Nebuchadnezzar, or Belshazzar and his friends and his wives, just to mock God. And in the same hour, verse 5 says. So just like in chapter 4 with Nebuchadnezzar, while the words were still in his mouth, and you see, as you go through the Bible, there's many instances like this. When Miriam, Moses' sister, complains she's struck with leprosy, Numbers 12. Elisha's servant Gehazi struck with leprosy. King Uzziah, 2 Chronicles 26, as he's making the motion, struck with leprosy in the temple. Ananias and Sapphira in Acts 5, struck dead when they're mocking God. King Herod in Acts chapter 12, struck with incurable disease. There's multiple times like that, multiple times in real life. You wonder, wow, that guy just keeled over, man, or wow, there was a fatal accident. Multiple times where God's patience just runs out on people's sin. And he doesn't hesitate any longer. His judgment falls. Just as it did here, in the same hour, the fingers of a man's hand appeared and wrote opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Then the king's countenance changed, his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his hips were loosed and his knees knocked against each other. Now again, this palace has been excavated. Nebuchadnezzar's palace, the banquet hall, where this is said to have taken place, is 56 feet wide, 173 feet long. It's got a niche carved out on one end in the front where the king was no doubt sitting. And interestingly, the wall behind this niche where he would be sitting covered with plaster, as described in verse 5. On which that night this supernatural hand appeared and it wrote this cryptic message. The wording in verse 5 indicates that the king alone saw the hand. Only the king saw the hand, but the writing appeared there. But he saw, the supernatural appearance of a hand, and his reaction really tells it all. The King James Version, verse 6, is really classic. It says, then the king's countenance was changed, his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against the other. It's a poetic way of saying he wet his pants, and his knees were clicking together like a cartoon character, sitting there. The color of his face turned pale, and his conscience was immediately struck with guilt and thoughts of impending doom, like I'm busted. I'm caught in the act. The king cried aloud, verse 7, to bring in the astrologers, Chaldeans, soothsayers. The king spoke, saying to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck. He shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. I hear the verb in verse 7 speaks of a loud cry of alarm. It's a terrified scream, but it's not unintelligible. This is a scream for help. Get the astrologers, get the Chaldeans. The whole party stops as this guy is screaming. And due to the supernatural appearance, he turns instantly to those who had supposed occultic powers. It's the same group of characters you see in just about every narrative of the Babylonian portion of the book of Daniel. And as I pointed out before, they all had their special area when it talks about astrologers and soothsayers. They all had a different area in which they worked, demonic activity. And as you see in these passages here in Daniel, they were held in high esteem in the Babylonian society. Those practices. We went down to Indiana, and you go down a certain road, and there's psychic readers, palm readers. I don't know if it's the area or what. I just don't travel in those areas. But there's multiple ones. And they're all busy. Those practices in Babylon have been elevated to great importance. You can't help but think of how much emphasis is placed on Halloween these days. I've seen Halloween stuff out for at least 2 weeks already. Currently, Halloween is the second largest commercial holiday in our country after Christmas. It's not always been that way. I don't know if I'm old. I remember that. It was like, I remember the day because you got tons of candy, But it wasn't 2 months preparation. Due to the increasingly heightened promotion, many believe it could very easily become the most popular holiday in coming years. It's already surpassed Thanksgiving, Easter, everything else but Christmas. The reason given by those who study modern demographics is because it's all about yourself and who you want to be. On Halloween, they say, there's not as much stress as other holidays where you have to worry about acting well. Halloween gives people license to practice evil, all in the name of fun. And now it's just, look at it, dude, it's leading up to it. You give, almost 2 months of pretending and, celebrating occultism and evil. Ancient Babylon was given over completely to those practices, which is why these people appear in these various accounts here in the book. They're always being looked to for answers. They're always the ones that they must know because they're so popular. It's like those celebrities, obviously they know. They starred in some movie. Obviously they have all the answers. They're rich and wealthy. But then when something happens, it shows that they have no clue about anything. And that was the idea here. They're always looked to, what do you think? But when it really goes down, they're unable to deliver. And they have to bring in someone who knows the Word of God, who knows God personally. See, these guys here even bribed with a position of royalty, which is what clothed in purple represents in verse 7, and a wealthy ruler, symbolized by their gold chain. If I gave him a Corvette. The third ruler in the kingdom, that was a statement seen by critics, again, that statement that they would be the third ruler. Oh, see, there wasn't 3 rulers. That was seen as inaccurate until the discovery that Belshazzar was co-regent with his father Nabonidus. It says in verse 8, now all the king's wise men came, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king its interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly troubled. His countenance was changed, and his lords were astonished. To say that his lords were astonished means they were greatly troubled as well. Fear came over all of them. It says they were all associated with the things that they were doing, the evil practices. And there was a sense, in other words, the way what's this saying, there was a sense of impending doom that came upon everybody there in just seeing some mysterious symbols appear on a wall. Nobody knew what it meant, but they knew, oh, it can't be good. Instantly, they felt condemned, they felt guilt, just because they were condemned and they were guilty. So whatever it meant, whatever that means, it's got to be bad. And even the wise men who would be ambitious for the king's rewards, they had to admit, we don't know. They had no clue what these symbols that appeared on the wall meant. And Daniel will interpret them in their language, but the symbols themselves, nobody understood what they meant. Now, when it speaks of the queen in verse 10, the queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came to the banquet hall. There, when it speaks of the queen, it's not Belshazzar's wife, because his wives were already present with him, verse 2 says. This queen was called in, verse 10 says, she was brought in is the verb. So they went and got her. And so it's seen as either the queen mother, this guy's mom, or his grandmother, wife of Nebuchadnezzar, which is the thought by many, because she's very familiar with Daniel. Nobody else remembers him. Daniel would be in his 80s by this time. And she describes him exactly as Nebuchadnezzar did years earlier in chapter 4. But she's brought into the banquet hall. The king spoke, or the queen spoke, saying, O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts trouble you, nor let your countenance change. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy God. And in the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, soothsayers, inasmuch as an excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding, interpreting dreams, solving riddles, explaining enigmas were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will give you the interpretation. So the response of the queen is indicating how Daniel's reputation and position in the kingdom had long ago faded away. Nobody remembered who this guy was. But obviously, it had not faded away amongst those of his generation, who this queen would have been. Belshazzar seems to, the king seems to have no clue that such a man even existed in his kingdom. The description she gives includes both the exceptional abilities that Daniel had when it came to understanding mysteries and the different puzzles and things that she includes there. So it includes, he's exceptional in unraveling mysteries that others can't, but also she includes the value that King Nebuchadnezzar had placed upon him. The guy's abilities weren't just hearsay, but Belshazzar's infamous grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar, had relied upon him and had made him the chief of the wise men in his day, according to verse 11, she tells him. Because of that, she says in verse 12, in total confidence, let Daniel be called, he will give you the interpretation. So there's no doubt in her mind. You call him, he'll do it. Then Daniel was brought in before the king. Verse 13 says, the king spoke and said to Daniel, are you that Daniel who was one of the captives from Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah? I have heard of you that the Spirit of God is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now, the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing and make known to me its interpretation of the thing. And I've heard of you that you can give interpretations, explain enigmas. Now, if you can read the writing, make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple, have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Now, this is interesting in that within the king's words, as Daniel's brought, his old man is brought in before him, there's this sense in the language that is used of some vague remembrance of hearing of such a person. Are you that Daniel, the captives? Almost like he's some legend, like Paul Bunyan or, Davy Crockett, there actually was a guy like that? That's the thinking here. You're the guy that everyone talked about and, all these legends sprung up around? All these ancient stories? You're that guy? I have heard of you, verse 14, that the Spirit of God is in you. Now, it's no accident that Belshazzar drops the adjective used by his grandmother in verse 11, the Spirit of the Holy God. I heard that the Spirit of God is in you. There's no reverence here throughout this man. No acquaintance with holiness of any sort. That's just forgotten. And evidently Daniel's reputation had become a source of legends. I've heard that light and understanding and wisdom are found in you, verse 14. It's speaking of the full measure. This is something, again, all these other people came in, they couldn't even give the information. They couldn't give an interpretation. But there's this legend that there was a guy who could give all of it. He had this incredible ability. When it says, I heard that there's light, light is symbolic of knowledge, a wealth of information. He had, information, knowledge about all different types of things. Knowledge with understanding. So he says, that there's light and understanding and excellent wisdom in you. Light is just a wealth of information, but information with understanding speaks of an added ability to interpret the knowledge, to give an understanding to the information. Wisdom is the extra added ability to then give counsel, excellent wisdom, verse 14, or the appropriate counsel in how to apply or to use the knowledge that's been interpreted. See, all these other people are saying they have that, they don't. This one guy is brought in and he has it all, and they thought it was just some legend. But that's what Daniel was known for, unlike all the other spiritual advisors in the kingdom. As Belshazzar declares in verse 15, all these other wise men don't even have the ability to make known the interpretation. They can't even tell me what the information is, let alone interpret it or give counsel. This mysterious writing that appeared. They have no clue what it says, and thus they have no ability to advise him in how to handle this situation at hand. And Daniel's offered the same advancement to a position of royalty in verse 16, to which he answered and said before the king, there in verse 17, let your gifts be for another, for yourself give your rewards to another, yet I will read the writing to the king, make known to him the interpretation. Now it says at the beginning of verse 17, he answered and said before the king. Not just he answered, not just he said. The use of two Aramaic verbs in introducing the passage that goes on here for several verses, that is intended to show how Daniel explains why he's going to give the answer he gives. He doesn't just tell him what it is, but he gives explanation of why he is giving the answer he gives. He doesn't just blow the guy off like, get lost, don't want anything to do with you. He declines the rewards. Let your gifts be for yourself. You can keep those. And give your reward to another. Let someone else can have that elevation to the third person in charge. So he's making sure up front that no one would think, he's motivated by greed. He wants to get a position. Just, you can keep all of those things, yet I will read this writing to the king, he says in verse 17, and I will make known the interpretation. I'll tell you what that information is and the interpretation. But before I do, it's introduced in this passage, like, before I do, let me explain why I answer the way I do, why I have no desire for the king's rewards. So Daniel's in a very dignified, respectful way. He assumes a position not of the king's counselor, but is very tactful, assumes the position of God's spokesman. I'm not your counselor, king. I serve a much higher power. I serve God, and let me explain why I answered the way I do. In verse 18, O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father a kingdom and majesty, glory, and honor. And because of the majesty that he gave him, all peoples, nations, languages trembled and feared before him. Whoever he wished, he executed. Whoever he wished, he kept alive. Whoever he wished, he set up. Whoever he wished, he put down. Now, here's something that is to be noted. Besides the incredible miracles and the amazing predictive prophecy that are included in this book that Daniel's known for, and that the book of Daniel's known for, what a lot of people miss, another great feature of this book of Daniel that can be overlooked, is its instruction in godly, wise speech by a representative of the Lord. If I'm speaking for the Lord, how do I do that? You study the book of Daniel. How to speak appropriately on God's behalf when you're put in a position, and believe me, if you understand and know how, God will put you in the position. That's what he did with Daniel. And he does it with many other people in the Bible. But this is a great book in learning those lessons. Daniel's very careful in how he responds in these situations that he's thrust into. And these are situations he's thrust into because of how he responds. If I know and I'm ready and I speak wisely, God will, he will move heaven and earth. He wants to reach people. He just doesn't want to be misrepresented. He doesn't want some goof just start instant. Think Daniel could walk in there and say, here I am, I'm your great hero. He could say, oh, you bunch of punks, anything. He's very wise, and God uses him to impact not just all these people at night, but how many people have read this book? He's given a platform throughout his life that he uses to glorify God and make an impression upon the unbelieving world around him. Chapter 1 gave us great insight into his reliance on prayer for that. So it wasn't his greatness, it was God's that he relied on. And you can be sure, you're going to be brought before the king. He doesn't even know who you are. You can be sure Daniel said, well, let me just have a few moments to pray about this, to prepare for this. Here, the whole royal court comes to a standstill. They're thrown into a place of helplessness, total reliance upon one guy. But he doesn't refuse to come. He said, first of all, I don't want nothing to do with that guy. He doesn't come in elevating his own stature like, here I am, I'm your savior. This is seen as just another opportunity to advance the Lord's majesty, to proclaim to those who think they're in control, this is who runs everything. It's not you. Now, I was asked to officiate at a funeral this morning. You talk about a situation where people are forced to deal with the reality that you're not in control. You're not in control of these things. Monday night, I'm going to be entering into 2 services in a supermax prison. It's another great opportunity to tell a bunch of people who think they're in control, you are not in control. I always teach biblical prophecy. Say, dude, this world's going to burn up, man. You're going down the wrong path. And when you're straight up, so often when you speak with tact, when you understand it, it's amazing how the places God will put you. And I found when I keep my spiritual radar up to the opportunities to remind people of the fact that there's a God in heaven, they're more prevalent than I realize. Satan just gets you distracted, so you look at all these other things, you're missing opportunity after opportunity. I just have to be ready and waiting, looking, and equipped. How do I speak to this group? How do I speak to that group? God, give me the ability. Lord, fill me with your Holy Spirit so that I can speak wisely in this situation. It's another opportunity. I don't care if it's one person standing in line at the checkout counter. It doesn't matter. You know, that person has to be reached. I'm there. This is the mission field for the moment, you know. You see that throughout Daniel's life. I'm sure he wasn't at home just watching HBO. He was involved in many things. He begins his explanation here. The way he does this, he doesn't say, oh, dude, you're toasted. You know, begins his explanation by giving this description of Nebuchadnezzar's earthly glory, this man's grandfather. He gives a description of his earthly glory with the object of his describing him in this way. He's not cutting this guy down, but the object is to impress upon the mind of Belshazzar just how inferior he was in comparison to his legendary grandfather. O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar, your grandfather, a kingdom, majesty, glory, honor. He would know these things. Dude, he could at his command kill somebody, at his command keep someone alive. Belshazzar couldn't. He could just throw big parties. The Most High God gave your infamous grandfather a kingdom, majesty, glory, honor. All the supreme earthly power that was given to Nebuchadnezzar was also taken away from him in verse 20. When his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. And he was driven from the sons of men. His heart was made like the beasts. His dwelling was with the wild donkeys. They fed him with grass like oxen. His body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men and appoints over it whomever he chooses. All that supreme earthly power that was given to him from God was also taken away from him when his heart was lifted up. He became completely filled with himself to where he became hardened in that condition of it's all about me and what I want. He was so consumed with pride that there was no ability on his part to change. Change was brought to him. And the episode of 7 years of insanity coming over King Nebuchadnezzar, that was undoubtedly something his grandson was well aware of. They don't really, detail that in the annals of the Babylonian history either. They just tell you all the good stuff. But this was something that this Belshazzar guy would be well aware of. That isn't the way that Daniel is expressing this, as though by way of reminder, you know this. As he states in verse 22, he says, you, his son Belshazzar, you've not humbled your heart, although you knew all this. He takes this moment to impress upon him, and you can be sure everybody else there is listening. And having reminded Belshazzar of the great heights of earthly power that his grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar, had achieved due to God's allowance, and to the just as great depths of humility that he had also been subjected to, Daniel now brings the focus upon Belshazzar and his foolishness in not learning the lessons of his predecessor. How many people are like that, dude? I look and read the accounts in the Bible. If I don't learn from it, I'm the fool. You know these things, he says, and yet you not only did not humble yourself, but you have lifted, he says in verse 23, you've lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. They have brought the vessels of his house before you and your lords and your wives, your concubines have drunk wine from them. And you have praised the gods of silver, gold, bronze, iron, wood, stone, which do not see, hear, or know, and the God who holds your breath in his hand owns all your ways you haven't glorified. It's pretty strong language it gives to him here. Even though Nebuchadnezzar had sinned to such a degree that he was reduced to a state of insanity for 7 years, there was restoration for him due to ignorance. Belshazzar was not ignorant. That's the thing. There comes accountability with understanding. There comes accountability with sitting in Bible studies and learning the Word of God. If I don't put it in practice, there comes accountability with that. Because God is looking at my heart and he's, no, why are you doing this? Nebuchadnezzar, there was a level of ignorance there, but there was no ignorance with this guy. He was not ignorant. Not only was he not ignorant, he defied the true and living God who did that to his grandfather. He sinned right in the face of the truth. That is the greater, the unpardonable sin, Jesus called it. Blasphemy against the Spirit. Knowing this is true and yet, going right against it. Knowing the truth. All Daniel is doing is pointing out the level of foolishness that this guy had achieved by willingly desecrating vessels that were set aside for the exclusive use in the worship of God. The God who holds your life in his hands. The one who gives you your very breath and owns your ways, directs every path. I can plan my course, man, but God is the one who directs what's going on. And he says, you mocked, you blasphemed the living God through your purposeful worship of dead gods made of inanimate material, formed by human hands. I mean, he's just exposing this guy for who he was in front of everybody. All of this, verses 18 through 23, are the reason that the fingers of the hand were sent by God, it says in verse 24. That's why you saw these fingers in this hand. They were sent by God, and why this writing was written. And this is the inscription. Here he gives him, the information. This is the inscription that was written. Many, many tekel upharsin. This is the interpretation of each word. Many, God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then Belshazzar gave the command. They clothed Daniel with purple, chain of gold, and made a proclamation that he should be third ruler. Now, what language this inscription was written in, that is a source of debate that goes back to rabbinic writings from before Christ. Whatever it was, Daniel translates it into Aramaic for the king. Some believe the 4 words were ancient Hebrew. Others believe it was written in Phoenician letters. Others believe it was symbols that nobody knew. It was just supernaturally made known to Daniel. Whatever they were, Daniel begins by translating whatever it was into the words the king would know. The word many is Aramaic and it means to number. It is doubled for emphasis. But it's not just numbering as in counting something, but numbering so as to fix a limit. The idea is literally you've been numbered, or your days are numbered, is how we'd say. Tekel, also Aramaic, means to weigh. The way Daniel interprets it in verse 27 is literally you've been weighed in the balance and you don't measure up. Now, the upharsin, the letter U, it's a conjunction, like and. That's why when he interprets Perez is so, like, and Perez is what the last word means. As Daniel interprets the rest of the word in verse 28, it is the plural form of the word divide. Your days are numbered. You've been weighed in the balance. You don't measure up, and so your kingdom has been divided. Some believe that is a reference to the Medo-Persian Empire divided between, those two, Medes and Persians. Others think it's just speaking of dissolving. Your kingdom's just toast, it's gone. Both of those are true. Either way, you read this, and it's just fascinating. Once again, you see how God accomplishes his will so creatively. He doesn't just judge the guy. Everything is done in a way that is so unordinary. It's so interesting. It grasps the attention of everybody and remains memorable forever. Even the unbelieving world will use a saying, when are they going to see the writing on the wall? Where they don't even know where it comes from. We do, But that's how God does things. Belshazzar, unfortunately, he just remains clueless. It says, he gave the command, and they clothed Daniel with purple. They put a chain of gold around his neck. They made the proclamation. He's the third ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, king of Chaldeans, was slain. Daniel's refusal to accept these honors and gifts in verse 17 was not phony. Had he not refused at that point and given the elaborate explanation for why, there would have been an assumption that he was just saying all of these things for reward, which he wasn't. The way it is presented in verse 29 here, where he gives the command, it's as though the king's fulfilling his original boast. He's just been called out, made a completely embarrassment. But now he's going to, fulfill his boast. It's being forced on Daniel. And with Daniel's absence of self-interest already established, there's no danger of his integrity being marred. He allows the king to carry out your order, claiming, whatever, dude. You're going to be dead tonight anyway. And that very night, the king was killed. And Darius the Mede, verse 31, received the kingdom being about 62 years old. It's an interesting way of putting it because King Cyrus is the one who conquered this city. Again, you can read it in secular history books. He's a genius general. This impregnable city, he had enough manpower that he took them upriver and he cut a channel and diverted the Euphrates River. He had two people who were, treasonous and out of the city who showed him where to get in. So when the river dried up, they were able to go in under the gate where the river originally had been going in. And they showed him how to unlock the doors, and it's fascinating to read. Especially when, you get this whole story, you don't read this in history books. You see, man, that's exactly what happened. In one night, they invaded the city and took it over. The city of Babylon and the kingdom, because that was the capital, they were conquered by King Cyrus, this brilliant military general. Darius the Mede was the representative of the Medo-Persian portion of the Persian Empire. He received it, it says in verse 31. It's a very specific verb describing how Darius received the oversight, the administration of the kingdom from Cyrus as he went on and conquered more places. It says he was 62 years old, which made him older than this conquering hero. Some historians record that Cyrus was this Darius's son-in-law. Whatever it is, as we saw in Ezra, another Darius, over the Persian Empire gets raised to the throne several decades later. But see, you think of this, how that portion of the transfer of world power at that time from Babylon to Persia took place, it's not very distinct. And people say, well, there was this guy, did that guy go in? And they got it narrowed down. But see, that which is important, how that transfer of power, took place, is written right here in our Bibles. The important part of it. as far as God's concerned, is made very clear. This is how they were conquered. This is why they were conquered. Take heed to this man and the way that he lives. Take heed to Daniel, because this man got slain. Daniel didn't. We're going to see as we move into chapter 6, Daniel, now in his latter years, he continues to influence world powers on God's behalf. Because he's not in it for himself. He's in it just to see God glorified. And God uses him all the way up to his death. And like we'll see in chapter 6, it doesn't get easier. It's not like he gets a desk job. He gets thrown to lions. But what a testimony he leaves. Father, thank you for Daniel. Thank you for preserving these words and just how he answers and how he reacts in situations that he's put into, Lord. And God, it's clear that he's put into these situations because of how he acts and how he handles himself. It's not all about him. He is just brought in and he's used to speak words for you, Lord God, and any one of us have that privilege each and every day, especially the days we're living in. We go out these doors and most of the people have no clue what is taking place in the world. And God, we do. We have a great information, so please, God, I just pray you just keep me attentive. So easily to get distracted. Just walking through the store, driving down the road, whatever it is, God, there's so many distractions. God, I don't want to lose sight of the main thing that I'm supposed to be doing as your servant here on earth. Whatever it is, whether it's in a prison or, again, whether it's just in a group of people somewhere, it doesn't matter, Lord. I will go and say whatever, wherever, God, by your power, by your strength, and by your enabling, because I'm nobody either. But God, you are so worthy of being broadcast to the whole world. So please use us to do that, God. And just thank you, Father, for going to Nebraska and Iowa and Indiana and hearing how this little body of believers here, our Friday nights have been broadcast over multiple states and multiple people being blessed and tuning in. We praise you, God, because you are the one who have done it. There's no way we could do it. And Father, it is us. We pray here tonight, God. It is the power of prayer that unleashes your power, God. And so hear our prayers, Lord, as we've been washed in your word and sung your praises, Lord. May we take this serious and see your will be done, Lord, in these dire days that we live in. In Jesus' name, amen.